Hello, friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Wizard Factory podcast. Tonight's episode is definitely a very important one. It's one we've been meaning to do for a good bit of time now, and this is, a very crucial stage as we are, still in the very early stages of this podcast. So, Brian and I feel it's very important to lay a strong foundation of the general truth and philosophy that we hold as our core fundamental first principles in everything that we do and everything that we talk about. So, it was about due time, as we've discussed a lot about the nature of freedom and, dare I say it, anarchy, that dirty, scary word that people don't really like. We're going to dive into this and really look at it from a lot of different angles tonight. We want to really kind of make this information accessible and easy to digest and connect with, whether you're brand new and never heard of this stuff before, or you're a little bit further along the path, and maybe we can kind of go into some depths and some different perspectives that maybe you haven't considered before, hopefully. So I guess, as we tend to do, we like to define our terms. So let's take the initial word anarchy. This comes from Greek, and if you separate them into their individual pieces, you have "an" meaning without or in the absence of, and archy meaning or relating to archons, which essentially means a ruler, or a ruler, a king, that sort of thing. So basically all it means is no rulers. And that's not to say no rules or just anything goes. That's one of the most common misconceptions that we hear in sharing these ideas. Brian, would you like to add anything to that?
Yes, I mean there's really it's definitely a word that we've seen has a certain stigma about it in society, and that's definitely a false stigma, because once you actually delve into the philosophy behind it, and again look at it from the purest etymological form, you can see that it is all about freedom. In fact, like they're you can't separate them, because to really be free, you can't have a master. You have to be the one that owns yourself. And then I think that that leads into being able to define our next term that we're going to be talking about here, which is the exact opposite of anarchy, and that is government. And this comes from the Latin gubernare, which means to control, and then mentes, which means mind, and that also refers back to the first principle of mentalism. So this is it means mind control, but I also like to look at it as a mind that believes in control.
Mm-hmm.
Because anyone advocating government, that's exactly at the very core essence of what they're advocating for. That is what they're doing.
Right. And I'd like to add one quick little side note. I've heard people that, when they come across this concept, government means mind control, and mentes, meaning mind, they're like, oh, so any word that ends with ment means control. No, not control, but like of the mind. And actually, as much as they're being kind of passive aggressive in that, I actually want to validate that statement, because taking it back to the Hermetic principles, and the first being mentalism. So the ment suffix to any given word means a state of. In other words, as the law of correspondence, what begins as mind to become in the state of, it means, do you see where I'm going with that? Like,
well, yeah, and then as you're saying, with the first Hermetic principle being that that everything is the all, everything is part of the mind.
Right. Also. Right. So, but for something to come into a state of anything, it is reflecting from that first state of mentalism. Yes.
Yeah. Exactly. Yes. So, and then would you like to get into our kind of next big term that we're going to be using here?
Yes. And, followers of this show have certainly heard this word plenty of times already, and that is sovereignty. That's one of the words we use the most with everything that we talk about, because it really is, in my opinion, I think that if my opinion is in alignment with truth, this is from my own personal understanding, sovereignty and free will and choice, which are all pretty much very much like directly connected to each other, is at the very center of the meaning or the purpose of our experience, of our existence, of our even coming into manifestation as these human beings that we are, is about to experience life. And how do we interact with this reality field? By our choices. And the different choices that we make dictate the different experiences that we're going to have to a certain point, but also the choices that other people make are also going to dictate the experience that we have, because we are all co-creating one singular shared experience. So our choices as the aggregate, but also on the individual level, is the entire point of this. When you talk about, we're, consciousness and what just become the process of human beings awakening, that's how we do it. We're here to have an experience which awakens our consciousness. And how do we do that? We make choices, and our bad choices awaken us to what not to do, and our good choices awaken us to we're doing the right thing, keep doing that. It sounds really simple, but it kind of is in a way.
Right. Wonderful. So, so from now that we've kind of got some of those basic terms defined, and again, we're kind of setting this episode up as some foundational knowledge, so for some new viewers to the channel who might not be familiar with a lot of this. That way, when we're using these terms and things, they're going to understand what we're talking about. But from this point on, we're really going to drop the euphemisms, and we're going to be calling things for what they are. Because government, when we look at it, if we look at mind control, or a person that has a mind that believes in control, that's a person that is advocating for slavery. They may be to very different, different degrees and extremes. But on the fundamental level, that's what they're advocating for, because they are immediately making that immediate violation of what you were talking about, Logan, which is sovereignty and free will. They're trying to force their own choices and project that onto other people.
Which this is actually to do. Absolutely, and this is actually bringing up a huge point for me right now. This concept that I identified, this dynamic between control and influence. These two things often get very conflated, and
that's very interesting.
So the control is I'm going to treat something or someone as my property. Influence is, okay, well, I have a certain desired outcome, but I also respect your sovereignty. So I'm going to try to put things into my favor or get the desired outcome, but without violating your sovereignty. In other words, a salesman that is, obviously not somebody who's lying to someone, but who's just, maybe being a little pushy to some degree, and whatever degree that is can be a little bit more abrasive and kind of icky even. But guess what? They're not forcing you to stay there. You can literally walk away if you want to. You can stop talking to them. No one's forcing you to have that conversation with them, and and they can't force you to buy what they're selling. They're just influencing you. So control would be, you're going to buy this or XYZ, something really horrible, So that's a really important distinction to make right there. But I also I realized that that I forgot to actually define sovereignty as well. I set it up for it, but then I totally lost my train of thought there. So again, if we break the words up and look at them individually, this is how we derive the intrinsic meaning of words. Words have two meanings. There's the commonly accepted or sort of, like consensus meaning that people generally understood. Anarchy, for example, perfect example. You say that to most people, they think Molotov cocktails, looting, rioting, Mad Max, all that stuff. And that is what it means to them. When you say the word, that's the meaning they're deriving from it because of their own, experience with it. But then there's also the intrinsic meaning of the word that does not change over time. It doesn't change based on opinions and propaganda and Law and Order, TV and stuff like that. And it just means no rulers. It's in the word. So sovereignty being the SOV, meaning above, and reign, sovereign, is rulership, again, ownership, whatever. So you're above being ruled, being reigned over. So again, this is the common theme here, is that we're all in an even keel. Different people have different skills, different willpower and drive and ambition and motivation and all these different things, but nobody has any more rights or less rights than anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just kind of that concept in a nutshell. So when we say sovereignty, that's what we mean, is that no one's above you, and you know where your boundaries are. You know that you're not going to it comes back to the simple yet so on point, in my opinion, saying, do no harm and take no shit. That is healthy boundaries in a nutshell. Don't encroach on anyone else's boundaries, but don't let anyone encroach upon yours. And that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So now,
yes.
That's a complete idea.
Okay. So now we want to kind of like move on to addressing a lot of the false presumptions, because this is something that people will have heard us talk about a lot, with the trivium process. And again, every single thing is built on a presumption, a premise, some kind of foundational knowledge. But if that is then skewed, that throws off the rest of the process of understanding and then your ability to take action. If you have incorrect information, you'll be taking incorrect action. So we want to make sure that the presumptions that we have are correct. And when we look at some of the foundational beliefs behind government and statism, we can see there's a lot of false premises these are built off of. And so we're going to look at a few of these here.
And I think it's worth noting that the reason that people have these certain ideas that come up, and Brian and I have both had countless conversations with people about this, and after a while you start hearing the same things out of people's mouths. It's almost like they're programmed. Of course, there's something to that. Why? Well, where did we go to school? By a state-run indoctrination center. Of course it's going to be pro-government and we need this. And then also people tend to react really emotionally, which is a sign of unresolved trauma. But guess what? Government is run upon coercion and trauma. It is trauma-based. So of course when you start challenging that, you're challenging the Stockholm syndrome. And so again, I'm sure a lot of our listeners are fully well aware of all this stuff, and this is elementary to some people, but for those who are your first time hearing this kind of thing, just try to suspend your emotional reaction and just look at the reasonable, logical aspect to what we are saying, and try to put that aside. I know that's not easy sometimes, for sure. It's very difficult, but just try. Okay, so as you were saying.
1 second. So the first one, that I was wanting to look at is really, that anti-government doesn't mean anti-organization. So this is like a really big kind of false assumption that you'll see people throw this argument, and even, maybe some anarchists even will kind of also be very individualistic and not be interested in any kind of organization at all, which is, kind of another interesting thing to look at. But when we look at it from kind of the person advocating for government's point of view, that false assumption there is that the only kind of organization that can be effective is forced organization, because they can't see an option beyond government. And government is, it's a very forceful kind of organization. It's not in alignment with natural law. But when we look at human interactions and they come from a place of being voluntary, then there's nothing wrong with organizing, as long as everybody that is participating in whatever that is voluntary, and then they are then not infringing upon the rights of anyone else. That's a very useful thing, because when we look at human beings as a species, we are definitely a species that we need we need to be in a group. For the most part, obviously, it makes survival a lot easier, but our species, we're very social creatures. So to try to take things to such an individualistic extreme and then not be open to organizations, that's also kind of coming out of a place of some unconscious, unresolved trauma. So I think both of these are false premises that we can look at, and it's about finding a balance, between, with things, so, organization is fine, but making sure that is voluntary. Do you want to go ahead and maybe delve into some of the other ones that we want to look at here?
Real quick on that topic that you're talking about here, again, we're going to try to be addressing specifically a lot of those sound bites that people consistently regurgitate when having these conversations with people. And a lot of things you'll hear come up again and again is this whole, how would we do this and how would we do that? The fact that they're concerned with how we would do this or that shows that there is a natural motivation to do those things. So why would you ever have to force someone to do something which has intrinsic value, first of all, but also where they're coming from, like you say, Brian, bringing it back to those underlying fundamental assumptions, pre-existing assumptions, is that there has to be one way to do something, and this is the way we're going to do it, and we're just going to force everybody to do it this way, my way, versus everybody contributing different ideas, and whatever is the most effective, whatever yields the results that they're obviously so concerned about, how would we do this or that, then it's going to get handled in the best way possible, as opposed to what if that one way was forced and that was not the best way to do it. It's like limiting the potential as well.
Absolutely. And another really fundamental premise that the belief in government is built on is that kind of that people are too stupid or too evil to control or govern themselves, so then we need to have a small group of people in charge controlling everybody else. When you kind of say it like that, it sounds really retarded, which it is, very much so, because it's holding us back from forward progress. So it's retarding our growth with holding a belief system like that in our mind, because taking it back to the principle of mentalism, if we have that that false knowledge, that false foundation and state of mind there, what we create is going to be a twisted form of what should be if we were in alignment with natural law and had foundational premises that were built in alignment with truth.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And if you want to consider what you were saying, that preconceived assumption is a very misanthropic belief system, that people are wretched, horrid things and they need to be violently dominated, which that's just a projection of their own self-loathing. People who have that misanthropic viewpoint about the world, they're just projecting that because that's how they view themselves. Either that, or they're schizophrenic, because by making blanket statements about humanity, they might be implying that they are somehow different, like either they fall under that blanket statement that they themselves are making, or they're contradicting themselves automatically by saying, well, I'm not like that, even though I just made a blanket statement, you know.
Right, okay, yeah. Yeah, sorry. Uh, I mean, it's definitely, and this is something that we talk about a lot too, but, I think that mindset that human beings that are kind of, that they're dumb or they're evil, very interesting to see where that belief system came from. And I think it, very recently uh, came into, human existence on the level that it has, within the last few thousand years. And I really think a lot of that is owed to, the Abrahamic traditions. But we're not going to delve into too much of that here, but in future episodes, that is something that we'll also be addressing, further in depth. But, the
Very
connection between those, and how that mindset of original sin and that people can't govern themselves are actually very, very similar to each other. So I think that, in the meantime, that might be an interesting thing for people to ponder.
Absolutely.
Another big one that's really funny, and it shows you how fear-based and kind of silly a lot of these assumptions are, is that the warlords would take over. If there was no, large, governing force controlling everybody, there would be another large, strong governing force come control everybody. It doesn't make any sense. And when you're especially willfully giving power to groups of people so they can just accumulate it and then continue to accumulate it as they always do in those positions, that's never going to stop a force like that from coming into existence, because by being afraid of it, and then taking those actions that aren't actually in alignment with cosmic law, you can end up creating what you're afraid of. And you end up creating that very, very thing that you were trying to prevent. I think the Constitution would probably be a great example of that. And what's happened here, especially in America, I think that there's idea that a lot of this was done to limit government and everything. So then they created a government, and then that's grown into one of the most monstrous empires in history. It's a very interesting thing to observe there. But, again, that tying it back to where we're operating from, when we're coming from a place of fear, we're operating from a place of trauma, from a place of not really thinking in our highest awareness. So then our decisions and the actions that we take are really going to be more kind of survival based and instinctual. And this really, it lead into it when you look at it, if you're speaking with a lot of people, and trying to show them, lead them to the ideas of anarchy and introduce that to them, you'll find a lot of their responses are very, very fear-based. Or if you yourself are still advocating for government, be very honest and stop and ask yourself, okay, so this is why I believe government should happen, and then trace that back. I can almost guarantee you there's probably some kind of fear-based assumption in there that's not actually based in reality. It's just a false assumption. But if you can remove that assumption and then replace it with one that is correct, then you can start changing how you filter and process that information, and then start changing the way you take actions into the world, which of course will then reflect into the reality that we create.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think it's very important to understand, if you've never considered this before, the simple fact that everything the government does is backed with violence. And, you can say there's justified use of violence, and absolutely, there is a justified use of force for self-defense reasons only, ever, period. The initiation of force is always wrong, period. And basically what we're saying is that if you took that coercive, violent component out of the equation, it wouldn't be government anymore. It would just be an organization, which is what we're actually advocating, is structured, organized society without forcing everybody to do something one certain way and then be forced to pay for it, even if they don't like that way that they're being, forced to go along with, essentially. So, taxation is definitely one of the biggest glaring aspects of government that is inherently immoral and is another euphemism for slavery, basically, because if you pay almost half of your income to the government for things you may or may not even benefit to, and you don't get a say in how that money is spent, that is indistinguishable from slavery. You can call it whatever you want, but that's what it is. And I think if people were forced to work the first 25 years of their life for all of their income that they got, and then the next 25 years of their life for absolutely free, and all of their profits went to the government to pay for this or that, they would realize the reality of slavery that they're living in.
But it's
or
just
even if you
done
do
in
it
like
year by
small
year.
incremental
Right.
steps, so then people don't, they don't notice it. And then, or even if they do very much notice it, because, even in society, so many people bitch about taxation, like nobody likes getting their money stolen from them,
Uncle Sam sure do take a chunk, don't he?
yeah. So, but they tolerate it because, they feel like they don't have a choice, there's fear-based assumptions that are, stopping them.
Right.
They're afraid to go to jail, or they're afraid a bunch of, armed, mindless thugs will show up and, harm them, or, kidnap them and do whatever. Or that society will fall apart if they don't pay this tribute,
Right. Right. And you just said it yourself. They feel like they don't have a choice.
Exactly.
That's what we're saying is
right.
Sovereignty is free will. If you're under coercion and I say, give me your money or I'll blow your brains out, you're going to give me that money, not because you wanted to. You chose to do it, yes, but only because you like the blow your brains out option a lot less than the give me your money part. So that's what you chose. So
right.
that is inherently wrong.
Kind of thing. Yeah.
Right. Let me see. So yeah, it's important to just always take everything back to the government is built on violence, and everything it does is paid for in stolen money. And that's kind of the part we have the biggest problem with, essentially.
And then, I think the next thing to look at, which is another fundamental false assumption that people advocating for government have, is that they believe they can delegate away rights they don't have. They believe there's a small group of people, that are allowed to issue commands, and that there's a larger group of people that have to listen to those. And if they don't, they're allowed to use violence, like harm them physically, put chains on them, throw them in a cage. When, you really start to look at it foundationally, it really is just modern day slavery. It's just done in such a way that, because it's through the mind, that people don't realize it, because they're under such deep mind control. So it takes a lot of time and effort to really be honest with yourself and step back and question these things and look at it from a lot of different perspectives and angles to kind of find some of these things.
I find analogies to be really, well, in general, really, really useful, but especially in these kind of things when euphemism is so prevalent and you can't see past the language that keeps you trapped in these walls of perception. So let's just take a simple example of what government does, but just put it in like a little microcosm scale. So you live on a street with 9 other houses, and all your neighbors, you live together in this community, and all of a sudden, let's take it from the individual level first. So your neighbor Bob, he goes over to your house and he says, well, I decided that I know what's best for you, and if the only way that you can get groceries is if you pay me your part of your paycheck, and I'll go and get the groceries for you. But you don't get to pick which kind of groceries you get or anything like that. I'll do that for you, and but you can trust me, and I'm not going to mismanage your money and this or that. You would laugh in their face and say, "Get off my property, you idiot!" Like that's ridiculous. So then your next neighbor comes over and they say, "Well, you can choose between me or Bob. One of us is going to take your money and buy you groceries, and you don't get to pick which one. But I promise I'll buy all your groceries organic. And Bob over there, he likes processed food." And then that's politics. That's what it is. Again, no one would go for that idea. And it doesn't matter if everyone in your whole neighborhood got together and voted that Bob has the right to steal half your paycheck to buy you groceries. It's still theft.
Mm-hmm.
But that's that's literally what government did is, well, enough of us got together and decided that we delegated the right of theft, which we don't have because theft is wrong. But if we all agree that Bob over here can theft you, as long as he promises to spend some of it on you in some kind of half-assed kind of way, then it's all really good. And this is the only way that you could get groceries. This is the civilized society that you pay for with your taxation. Otherwise the entire world would fall apart if Bob didn't steal your money.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's insane when you put it that way. Nobody would just go for that idea. Like, oh, that's a great idea.
And what it sets up for is, the types that are really drawn towards, wanting to be the one in control of like that and are willing to use force to do that. They're very much stuck in the predatory mindset that we talked about before in our Thin Blue Lie episode, where we looked at, order followers and the police specifically. But it's also, even almost more so than there, it's a parasitic type of mindset. Because they're not producing anything. They're only creating destruction. Like everything they have, it is taken and stolen. It's an entity that's really a parasite, and it's a mind virus that is a parasite. It's a parasite of the mind. But there was something the other day that when we were chatting, you were talking about terrain modification. Would you like to kind of explain the physical aspect of that, and then what that is, and then we can delve into kind of how we can relate that back to the field of the mind?
Yeah, absolutely. So in my years of research into nutrition and health and wellness and things like that, I looked into a little bit about, parasitology and the way that these parasites, these worms and things like that get into your system, and they breed, and they literally can like control your emotions and make you crave different shitty foods, and it's really crazy. And the thing is, when you have a bunch of those, you don't want to just take some like stuff to kill them, because that's a really bad idea. They're all going to die off inside you and then make you really sick because they're decomposing and like toxifying your insides. So what you do is this concept called terrain modification. So those parasites are only there because, in a way, in an indirect sort of way, you sort of invited them there because you're eating in a toxic enough way to create an environment where a parasite would thrive. So instead of killing them off, you would just change the internal environment that is counterproductive to their comfort and thriving, basically. And by natural process, they will just leave your body and find some other person, that's more suited to their needs, essentially. So that's what terrain modification is.
Right. Yeah. And whenever you were speaking about that the other day, it really brought up for me, that, government, taking back to the etymological, root, we can see that, obviously it's control of the mind. So the only way that can exist is if the mind is in a state, where that kind of belief system can come in there. So it has to be in an empowered or a disempowered state of mind. It has to be, a state of mind where a person, doesn't want to have that internal sovereignty and responsibility, and they want to delegate away their responsibility to someone else. So, you have to have that fundamental flaw there, and then that's when these belief systems can seep in. So, and a lot of times this is done through obviously trauma. And this is why, trauma-based mind control, this is why it's so prevalent throughout our society and done in so many different forms. Because, once you do that and you can make people disempowered, that terrain is then perfect for this parasitic mindset to be accepted and taken in. And that works with all sorts of different belief systems, like different little mind parasites, as we kind of like to call them.
Right. And also, I think it's really important to note, again, back to the indoctrination camps that they call schools, is what they're really doing. It's trauma-based in a way, but it's also very much gaslighting children, is basically, because the first 7 years of life, the child is in the formative years. They don't have sovereignty. They haven't learned boundaries of their own and, for others. That's why the government is running the schools, so they can get to the children at an early enough age to indoctrinate them into that way of thinking, and telling them, all the gaslighting things about humans, and how horrible and, uncivilized they are, and how we need government equates to civilization. Going through school and you're learning about history and all the nasty savages, and then we came in there and, that all those narratives are painting that picture, and installing that mind virus at a very early age before they have the cognitive capacity to logic and reason their way out of it. They just kind of accept it.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's, again, this is going to be a theme that, people will hear a lot throughout this talk is, getting back to the state of mind. That is the field that you can, make fertile for an amazing amount of growth and prosperity to occur there. Or if you're not taking care of it, then it's going to become stagnant, and you're going to have all sorts of things growing there that you don't want. And this is really kind of what we're getting at, is accepting and coming from a healthy state of mind, and, looking at, anarchy, and then acting in alignment with cosmic law, and honoring free will and sovereignty and boundaries, not only for yourself, but for other beings. That should be the fundamental premise through which all your actions are based off of. So that's why people are going to hear us keep reiterating this, because we can't stress it enough here, is that you can look at it from as many ways as you want to. You can always trace it back to that.
Right. If it's not anarchy or the absence of rulers, then you are condoning a master and slave dynamic, that some people are up here and some people are down here. And that's the exact opposite of sovereignty, meaning no reign. There is no, it's all here in terms of rights.
Right. Absolutely. And, again, the craving for this mindset, it comes up from this disempowered mindset, and they feel like as we said earlier, they don't have the choice, and it's because they're lacking the tools in order to rise up to the challenges. They're lacking that imagination.
Yes.
So they feel like there's no option outside of government. Like they can't even fathom anything outside of that. That's how deeply some of these belief systems are ingrained.
Right.
So it's not just the conscious mind either. I think this would be a good time to bring this up, is that, there are the three different levels of the mind. Is, people who've been following our channel, they'll hear us talk about a lot that, there's the conscious mind, but there's also the subconscious and the unconscious mind. And all of these have an effect, and it's really the subconscious and the unconscious mind, especially the unconscious, where this trauma and these belief systems are held. So people aren't aware that they're actually holding them and why they are. so it's really important to be able to question and dig at these and be honest with yourself, so you can start to bring those up and actually address them and see, well, is that actually something that resonates with me? Do I find that to be, is that in alignment with truth? Is that right? And be
Right.
willing to look at that and then go from there.
Yeah, because it's like, again, with that question, well, how would we do X, Y, and Z? How will we build the roads is the one that, almost as a cliche in the anarchy community now, because it comes up so much. It's the
Right.
modern day equivalent of how would we pick the cotton? And,
Yeah.
and that may sound extreme at first, but if you think about it, basically, we're trying to say initiation of violence or coercion is morally wrong, and then their response is, well, yeah, but how is this practical? How is your moral platitude practical to me in my life? That is an absolutely catastrophic presumption to be coming from there as a response to that. So again, it's like you said yourself, absolutely on point. It's the death of the imagination. We've been so indoctrinated to think that government is the way that we do things in society, and this is how we can get stuff done. You start saying, take that away, they're like, well, how would we do anything? And it's like saying, how would I buy groceries if somebody didn't come and steal my money and buy me groceries? Like,
Yeah.
it's insane when you put it that way.
Right. And I think it also comes from another false premise of this kind of utopian idea that they're trying to control and make a life that there's no suffering or there's no challenges. So they're trying to delegate away this right to this false parent, government, and to take care of them in the way that they want, so they don't have to worry about that. They want to just be taken care of because they're afraid of those challenges, because again, they feel like they're disempowered and they don't have the tools to be able to rise up and face those. So
Right.
that they don't know. That's where there is no imagination.
That's called learned helplessness, and that is what
Right.
a child does when they don't want to move out and they don't want to learn how to balance their damn checkbooks. They just want mommy and daddy to do everything for them. That's learned helplessness, and that is the exact opposite of sovereignty, of self-ownership and taking responsibility and being a spiritual grown-up or an adult. And this idea of challenge, that is the sharp edge of natural law that's going to propel you to do better, to try different things. Oh, this is really hard. I need to think. I need to try harder. That's what turns the coal into a diamond. It is that pressure, and that you should. First of all, eliminating struggle and hardship is absolutely impossible because it's inherently part of the universe, but nor should you want to do that, because that's exactly what propels humanity to greatness. That is the catalyst of our evolution. It is a gift. It should be embraced. Right. That's why the warrior archetype has gotten so lost in our society, because that's what that is becoming a warrior means you're going to rise up and meet that challenge, whatever it is, because you stand in truth.
And that's exactly what I was getting ready to say there, is that really can tie back to what we talk about a lot here, is being a spiritual warrior, and which is honoring sovereignty and boundaries, and honoring that other people have their path and their own journey in coming to this, so honoring that process. But I like to look at, take it back to the mythology here, and obviously, Odin, in his sacrifice on the Yggdrasil, or when he sacrificed his eye in the well of the mirror, he was seeking wisdom, but he didn't go and ask someone else to do it. He wasn't like, hey Loki, I really want this knowledge. Can you make this sacrifice for me and then just give it to me? No, he's willing to sacrifice it, sacrifice himself. To rise, to that, and that's really, that path, that mindset that we're trying to advocate, because that's a mindset that is empowered. It's like, it's not only not trying to seek suffering, but willingly going out and seeking those challenges, because you understand that is a catalyst for some of the deepest growth that you can experience.
Right.
And to, try to totally avoid that is like trying to stay a spiritual infant, which is ultimately what happens when you're doing and advocating these mindsets.
Right. That's how you get a spoiled child. When you give them everything and they haven't earned it, you're teaching them that, oh, just everything will be handed to you, and it makes them soft, it makes them entitled, whiny, and essentially you are disempowering them by doing that. It's like the baby chicken when it's trying to hatch out of the egg. Did you know that if you help a chicken hatch out of its egg, it will
It'll
die
die.
because
Yeah.
it didn't learn that struggle of breaking free. Powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. So honoring that
Yeah.
process, and we've talked about the hero's journey, a lot in some of our previous work, and it's again that challenge in the hero's journey that allows the hero to transform themselves and to learn the lessons that they need to.
Absolutely. So, and this ties into the false guarantee of safety as well. So it's not just, I want, the government there to do all the hard stuff, the icky stuff that I don't want to do, but also to protect me because, again, people are so disempowered, they would be shitting themselves if they ever had to get into some kind of an actual like conflict type of situation. But ultimately, you can't trust the government to keep you safe. And in fact, more often than not, they're doing way more to harm to the public at large than your average petty crooks. I mean, me personally, I've been extorted for, thousands and thousands of dollars, not even counting taxation. And I've never been robbed at gunpoint or had my credit card stolen. I'm not saying those things don't happen, but statistically, the common crook doesn't hold a candle up to the organized mafia called government.
Right. And I think a good thing to look at here too would be, take it, not just with like just that burglary and, small things like that, but even maybe more serious crimes like, people, like what, if there was a government there, there'd just be like, rapists and serial killers running amok. Even if you look at some of the most famous serial killers out there, the number of their victims doesn't even come anywhere close to the amount of people that are extorted every single day by governments or murdered, the mass amount of genocide that's been committed at,
and
under the
democide.
guise of, yeah, exactly. And under
democide is another word most people have never heard before. It means death by government. And if you take those numbers compared to anything else, I mean, it's everything else is not even a speck on the graph compared to democide.
Right, exactly. So, when you look at, that, yeah, there might be a very small percentage of people that are going out there, but compared, statistically, when you're looking at the numbers, going and advocating for something that's going to create a guaranteed amount of that and just in such an astronomical, a lot larger, more impactful way, that doesn't make any sense, because if you just have the ability for people to, understand sovereignty and to defend themselves, those types of people and individuals are going to be a lot less prevalent. And, and again, even we could maybe even take this further, and this is getting off on a little bit of a tangent here, but a lot of those personality types that become prevalent in society, a lot of those effects could be because that is a mindset that is bred in society, because that control, that domination, that kind of psychopathic and predatory mindset is a foundational building block of our society. It's no wonder that there are a lot of individuals that then take that to an extreme.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, again, safety can never be guaranteed. Even in prison, it's the most controlled environment on earth, where there's guards on every corner and cavity searches and shit. They're still constantly having, violence, drug smuggling, like you name it. Like, you can't stop crime. It's going to happen. And you can, good people aren't good because the law says they should be. It's because they have a conscience. That's why. And people that don't have a conscience, they break the law. So the government doesn't stop them from being bad either. Yes, there's bad people out there, very, very bad people. And either they could care less about the law, or they're just going to join the government and do what they want to do legally by extorting people, or become a cop and go and, body slam people and throw them in cages and stuff and steal their money.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So we could look at more of these euphemisms, taxation and extortion, arrest and kidnapping, basically like perjury would be like standing in your sovereignty and saying, no, you're not above me. You're not God up there on your little throne with your black robes and shit, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge amount of euphemisms, and those are really essential to the gaslighting that is done in order for, the mindset of government to be accepted. And this is something that if people want to get a little deeper into it, we talked about it a little more in depth in our Thin Blue Lie episode about police, because these are, obviously it's they're the enforcers and the order followers that actually physically take the actions to enact government. These are the tactics that they use. And they use euphemisms as a way to gaslight people. So they're making a twisted and warped version of reality so people can't see through those lies and actually see what is happening to them. And because they're too afraid to even try to question it, to recognize that, so then they can stop it from happening to themselves. And there's so many different, ways you could look at this. One of the ones we talked about, like with the police, they'll always say they're trying to pull you over for safety, but then they come and threaten your physical safety, or they extort your money, or, physically harm you or throw you in a cage, but it's for your safety. Like, that's definitely gaslighting.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. They care about controlling you, and that's about it, because they're parasites. And I mean, their whole existence is based around that. And, we can see here too that, so for freedom to exist in a society, it has to exist on the level first of the individual, and then out in the aggregate into society. Because, and all it takes for freedom to exist is for each individual to be able to understand their sovereignty, their boundaries, and then to honor that with themselves, but to not violate that of others. And it seems so simple that all you have to do is, take care of yourself. But it really, this is a great example of complicated simplicity, I guess, which is, a concept that I like to talk about, that, everything can be both very complex and very simple. But so, yes, you need to take care of yourself and, make sure that you understand sovereignty and that you are not violating anyone else's rights. But the complexity can come in, and then making that go out to the aggregate. And I, obviously this is where sharing information comes in. But really just leading by example, I think, is the best way to spread this kind of awareness.
Inspire people.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when people do see, there's a natural recognition of something there. Like when people, because as we've been talking about, they accept this mindset because they don't believe a lot of times they don't believe they have another choice, but when all of a sudden they see there's another choice, and it's a lot more appealing, and it has freedom involved, and it can, it's explained to them in a way that they can understand it, most people are very open to that. But if you come at it from a very harsh kind of dogmatic point where you're just attacking them or calling them, stupid sheep, or, demeaning them, you're going to get, they're going to reject. Because if you understand they're under this mind control that's built on trauma, you don't come at a traumatized individual like that. Because what you're going to do, you're going to trigger that trauma, and then you're going to shut them down. So you have to be able to recognize where people are at, and then be able to using the Socratic method obviously is a great way to do that, and allow them to kind of walk themselves to the
Right.
conclusions and see what they're actually looking at.
Which is by asking, but just for those who don't know this, the Socratic method is where you ask them questions about what they believe and then follow their own line of logic based on their responses to lead them to the cognitive dissonance in their own mind and let them see it for themselves. And most, a lot of time, you can lead them right up to it and just, it's like right there, and they'll just ignore it, or they'll just take the conversation in a completely different direction and squirm their way around or whatever. But that's on them too, because sovereignty too. They're responsible for their own ignorance of what is right in front of their face. If that's how they want to, then fine. You've done your part at least. But you can't force them. Even if you're promoting something as morally sound as the principles of anarchy, using a hammer to beat that into them is actually not respecting their boundaries, which is very not anarchistic of you to do.
Right, absolutely. And a lot of that can go back to, unsolicited advice,
yes.
And learning, how and when to present information, and to go about that, because if someone comes to you from free will looking for information, they're going to be a lot more receptive to it rather than you just kind of come and, projectile vomit on them. They won't really respond very well to that.
Exactly.
So, and some other, things we want to look at here is this kind of phrase or this idea that, if there wasn't government, the criminals would take over. And, we kind of talked about this a little bit already here. But, the average criminal, that's really kind of an odd thing to say when you're actually empowering a bunch of people to essentially become criminals, but that are legal, and exactly and then you end up creating this force that is just so much larger than what you were originally kind of afraid of.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's definitely not a very good way to go about addressing that. And really, again, that's coming from a fear-based mindset, and coming from people who are disempowered and they feel like they can't defend themselves. They kind of feel weak. So then they're afraid of someone coming and violating their rights,
right. And that's why the entire system is built upon fear. People want to control what they don't understand, what they can't predict. That's another thing. Oh, well, what are we talking about here? Free will. Free will is the random component of the universe. You never know what it's going to do. They don't like that. It scares them. So they're going to try to control it and, actually limit that.
Right.
I mean, and I really want to get this in here because, it's so important for people to understand exactly what it is that they are advocating when they talk about government, or when they say things like there ought to be a law such and such. I remember when I was doing my training to be a truck driver, the trainer that I was assigned to, I spent three months in the truck with him. We talked a lot about this stuff. I don't think he was too receptive to it, but we were in a truck stop once, and this guy got out of his truck and he was wearing flip-flops. And he literally said, my trainer said to me, "Oh, that just pisses me off. That there ought to be a law against that," or something like that. The guy was wearing flip-flops. And I mean, of course, I think there's not many people who would really go for something that kind of absurd to outlaw flip-flop. I think he meant truck drivers wearing flip-flops or something like that. I don't know what was the context, but regardless, what he's saying is, when you say there ought to be a law, you're basically saying that I condone violence against you if you don't do the thing, or if you do the thing that I don't like. So you're literally you're endorsing violence, and it doesn't always start there. It's usually a fine, right, or something like that. But if I just decide I'm going to fine you for wearing the color blue, every time you wear the color blue, you owe me money. If I'm not the government, you'd laugh in my face again and just be like, "What the hell are you talking about? You're insane. What kind of person thinks like that? That you think you're God? You can just determine."
Very narcissistic, yeah.
Right. So it starts with a fine. Here's another euphemism. Oh, it's not theft, it's a fine. And it starts very nice and formal, and you get a letter in the mail saying,
Mhm.
please kindly give us this money that we decided you owe us. If you don't, it's okay, but you probably won't like what happens. And so let's follow that line of logic all the way down. So it starts with a nice little fine, not so big of a deal, may not even be that much. Oh, why are you making a big deal? Just pay the, $50 or whatever, and then it'll be done with, right? But no, this is a matter of principle. You determine that I owe money, which I do not owe, based on a completely arbitrary dictate that some person I don't even know decided at some point, right? So I don't owe you that money. I don't care if it's $1. I don't owe you that. And if you send people to extort that money or to enforce that law and make sure that I pay it, should I have the moral, not legal, but moral right to defend myself against these people who are now being physically violent towards me because I don't want to give up what is mine? What happens then? You can say, oh, you're making such a big deal out of this. No, but that's what it actually means. If you
Mhm.
refuse to pay a fine, you get a warrant. If you have a
Mhm.
warrant, people have the legal right or authority to come and try to kidnap you. Well, if some random person tries to come and kidnap me on the street and I don't even know these people, do I have the right to defend myself with force if necessary? Absolutely. Well, what if they're wearing a uniform? Well, now you're going from defending your one man against another, or however many, just human beings, somebody defending their own rights. Now we're talking about what happens if you start shooting cops. Oh, well, somehow them wearing uniforms makes it different. No, it does not. That's sovereignty. Everyone's the same. We all have nobody's up
Mhm.
here and down here. So now we're talking about, yes, I have the moral right to kill, if necessary, police officers that are trying to violate my rights, because it doesn't matter who they are. They don't have the right to be doing what they are doing. So this is what you're advocating when you say ban flip-flops or whatever. That's how ridiculous it. You're basically saying that person should be killed, because that's what a cop's going to do. If you're resisting with force and defending yourself and hitting them and what else, they're going to use force up until killing you until you comply. So that's what you're
Mhm.
actually advocating. And let's not lie to ourselves anymore. You have to
Mhm.
acknowledge that this is what you are advocating if you are in favor of government. That's it.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter what the law is. If we're talking about murder laws, well, yeah, that's already morally wrong. So people should have the moral right to use force to defend themselves against somebody who's trying to kill them, or come into someone else's defense that somebody's trying to
Mhm.
kill them. But when you're talking about you park too close to the damn curb, and now you think that that person owes somebody money and that they should be beaten and possibly killed or kidnapped if they
Mhm.
don't want to pay it, that is psychopathic.
Mhm.
That is psychopathic.
Mhm.
End rant.
Yeah. And
I just wanted
another
to get that out there.
another another really, interesting kind of fear-based mindset that the belief in government people advocate for is this scarcity mindset.
Mm.
A lack of resources, a lack of, how is infrastructure going to be taken care of? And we've done an episode about permaculture, in the past that people, can go check out as well. There's a 2-part episode on that. But using, like even just a lot of people are so scared that they don't even know how to provide for themselves or how they would, build houses or do any of this. And, permaculture is a great field to study to start getting into that, to looking at how to, grow food more abundantly and in alignment with, how nature is actually operating to where you're producing abundance instead of scarcity. Because the scarcity mindset, that is the terrain, as we were talking about earlier, that is allowing, this kind of predator
Mm.
mindset and this parasitic mindset to kind of take over. Whereas if you can move into a mindset where you're creating abundance, um, that fear is removed. And if that's the basis or kind of like the foundation that starts the spoiling of the terrain, I guess we could say,
Mm-hmm.
once you remove that, then all of a sudden you have a lot more room for, healthy growth to happen. So looking, and getting into more of an abundant mindset and getting out of the scarcity mindset, I think is a really important part to being able to look for the solutions to get past the belief in government and why people advocate for government, and actually offer solutions that people can see, oh, there is a better way. There's another option that we can look at.
There's infinite better ways.
Yes, exactly.
And no one has the right to force you that their way is the right way and this is how we're going to do it or else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I think really what this is
Absolutely.
bringing up for me is how important it is to understand that centralization of power is ultimately a recipe for disaster. It doesn't matter what you're dealing with, but for sure dealing with government. And think about cities. You're bringing up permaculture. It made me think of, well, why did we start needing more farms? Because we have these large masses of populations crowded into cities, right? There's that stagnant energy that we talk about in that episode.
Right.
Festering stagnation, and and then we've got all these industrial farms trying to get food to all these people. And where's the highest crime rates by far is in these cities. So centralized living places call for centralized government authority to police the streets and try to keep it safe, because you got all these people, they're angry, they're living out of alignment or in opposition with nature, and of course that makes them violent and cranky, and then bad things happen and they call, well, we need police, we need to make this more safe. Really, we need to decentralize everything and spread it out and allow the flow of energy freely. And it's kind of like like looking at the blockchain. If you have like a centralized bank that keeps all the ledgers, if someone hacks that, then that one thing is compromised and it corrupts the entire system. But if it's decentralized and no one place has all the information or all the power or whatever, and make it all spread out, that even if one little node gets compromised or corrupted, it means absolutely fuck all to all the other ones, because they're just going to be like, well, and then they can just go and crush that. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So decentralization really is the name of the game, and
diversity. Yeah.
Moving forward into tying this back to astrology in the age of Aquarius is really all about voluntary interaction and cooperation. That's what we're moving towards. And so the people that are clinging to government are actually clinging to an old, outdated and obsolete more and more by the day, state of mind and operating system, essentially.
Absolutely. That's a very, very excellent point to bring up with that. So now we kind of want to move into, looking at this through, some of looking at the Hermetic principles here. So obviously we've mentioned, the principle of mentalism and, both how these relate to anarchy as well as government. That with government, they're coming from this false, disempowered state of mind, and then so as they feel violated, and then as overcompensation for that, because they're coming from a place of fear, they then advocate for trying to control everything to make them feel safe. Whereas with anarchy, if you're coming from the empowered state of mind, you're understanding that you are a sovereign being, that you have boundaries and rights, and that you don't want yours violated, but you're also not going to violate and infringe that of others. That state, that's a totally different state of mind. And then those two, depending on where you're operating from, that's then going to affect the actions that you take and then the effect that you have in the world. And that's also very similar to, the law of correspondence, because where you have internally going on, in our state of mind, we're then going to be projecting out into the world.
Right. Yeah. And we can also tie this into the trivium as well, because it's no accident that government means mind control, and that it is mind control, because the people who designed it and are continuing to keep that as the primary, physical institution of control, is they understand this very, very well. And the trivium is a perfect depiction of this principle of mentalism and correspondence in action, where everything starts in that first block. Imagine like a pyramid, where the very base layer is knowledge, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, which is just the information. And then taking that into the self, the consciousness, integrating that, informing understanding, so that you have attained the knowledge, but you also understand it, and you've integrated it. And then finally, taking action in alignment with that knowledge, which is going to manifest in reality. This is what what I mentioned at the very beginning of this talk, of like your choices dictating what experience we're having here. They understand this dynamic of reality manifestation very, very well. Just, incredibly deeply, they understand this. That's why they've built this structure on top of it and actually created basically a proxy pseudo artificial version of natural law, where they're controlling the mind at the information level with the media and the school indoctrination camps. They're controlling the mind from the information level, and then keeping you in that state, so that everything they're doing, I mean, the government doesn't actually even have to do that much, because we're now our own jail keepers. It's the few that act out. They try to make an example of them, and everybody goes, "Oh yeah, nasty lawbreaker, criminal scum." And we're over here. People say it so proudly. Well, I'm a tax-paying, law-abiding citizen, as if that's something to be valued or
Proud of, right?
All that means is you're a good little slave and you do what you're told. That I don't respect at all. And just tying that back to the trivium and the law of correspondence of what begins in the mind then corresponds into reality through the choices, such as voting, continuing to advocate this slavery system. You're over here saying you want freedom, but then in action you're actually supporting slavery with your voting and your thin blue line and all this crap.
And then, yeah, that's definitely excellent points. And the next law that we look at, obviously, here is the law of vibration. And, I think there's some fun wordplay that we can look at here to understand this, and that's looking at the word universe itself. And there's a couple ways we can break this down. We can look at it as universe, so the one verse or the one song. And looking, again, that can tie back in with the principal mentalism, that this is all part of the mind of the all. This is, everything is vibrating, everything is part of this song. But then you could break it down further and take the uni, and it looks at you and I. So the universe is made of you and I, and then the song, the vibration, the
singing
frequency
together
that we're putting out there and creating is then, co-creating the reality
like
that
choir
is experiencing. It very exactly.
And then what do you get? Harmony. When your voice and my voice go together to create a beautiful song, they call that harmony. We all want to live in peace and harmony, right? Harmonizing with each other based on we're all vibrating from that higher frequency of love and sovereignty and self-respect, mutual, self-respect.
And I do think it's very interesting with this kind of metaphor here that in some of Tolkien's work in his book, The Silmarillion, and you look at the creation myth of his pantheon of gods and how Middle Earth and that realm came into being. Really exactly on that. It's a very, very interesting story. So maybe sometime we'll do an episode about that, or that'll probably be something that I might even,
I love that.
Mastering Midgard as well, because it's a very interesting mythology to get into, and very much can tie in with the principle of vibration.
Right. Well, and in no way to endorse, the Abrahamic religions or anything, but again, simply because I was raised Christian and I'm familiar with that. Even in the Bible, what does it say? That God spoke he brought everything into creation through voice. And what is voice but just sound and vibration? So everything, and that's in that way, that's how we're like little miniature, little g gods in our creative ability, because we have a mind from which we can create, such as the universe, and we have a voice that we can create with as well. I mean, even in Skyrim, they talk about the voice of the dragonborn, and what is your special abilities called? Shouts. You use your voice to command the elements and things like that. So, and then hell, even in like fantasy and in like Harry Potter and stuff, how do you cast spells? Spelling. You speak it. You know, abracadabra. I create what I speak is literally what that translates in Hebrew.
Right. And then the next one, you know, the next law is obviously the law of polarity, and understanding that everything has poles, you know, that there's a positive and negative aspect to everything, and there's going to be, you know, different extremes of this. And there was a little quote here that you kind of wanted to share in context of this here, Logan. Would you like to do that?
Yeah, it just, when we were talking about this earlier today, it reminded me of something that I posted like a couple of months ago. Anything less than freedom is just different degrees of slavery. And when you read the Kabbalion and go into depth on these Hermetic principles, you know, that's what essentially this polarity principle means, is kind of like the other platitude, Brian, that you've come up with about everything is the same, just in a different way. Is that's what it's lending itself to this. It's just varying, you know, it varies only by degrees. You know, hot and cold aren't really a thing, you know, so much as they're just different degrees of temperature, in other words.
Right, exactly. You know, so we can look at, you know, this is an aspect that's played on here, and especially with like government, you know, people become obviously very polarized. There's, you know, the left and the right. You know, there's the people that go for fascism or communism, but really what they all are just slavery to different degrees. So we can see that, you know, that principle tying in with that.
Well, different forms of slavery, you could say.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
It's like everyone's arguing about what's the right kind of slavery. And then we're the anarchists over here just going, why slavery though? And everyone's just like, like, you know, like that's the game that we're in, essentially, is they're arguing over what kind of slavery is the best. And then we're just saying, how about no slavery? That's crazy.
And yeah, the next thing that we can look at here is the, you know, the principle of rhythm. You know, and this is referring to, you know, that there's always this pendulum swing, this rhythm in nature that
something white people don't have.
Right. there's always these cycles. And, you know, I think a very interesting thing to kind of maybe look at here is, you know, you were talking about how government has kind of set up itself as a proxy for cosmic law, proxy for nature. And we can see things like the seasons and the cycles. And you had, you know, mentioned earlier when we were doing our kind of little pre-chat, how that can kind of relate to, you know, the political determinants and things. And that's kind of, you know, there's the political seasons that are kind of the proxy for the natural seasons. And, you know, it's kind of like this false version of this pendulum swing and these cycles that are going on.
Think about how many people out there that know like so much about all these different, the primaries are coming up and this and that, but I bet you they couldn't tell you one single thing from the Farmer's Almanac.
Right, yeah, like
zero knowledge of actual nature and its cycles.
Yeah, so this proxy is something here, you know, and then obviously looking at, you know, cause and effect. That's something that we've been, you know, talking about throughout this whole talk. That obviously, you know, every time you put an action out there, there's going to be an effect, a reaction from that. So, you know, if your actions are in alignment with cosmic law, you're going to have a result of freedom, of anarchy. But if they're out of alignment with cosmic law, you're going to end up with skewed versions of reality where you have things like government, slavery, and things like that that are manifesting in society. And you have, you know, scarcity, and all these other things that we say that we don't want as human beings, but yet we're creating because of the actions that we take.
And let's not forget, inaction is an action. So simply by doing nothing or saying not my problem, or oh, I just need to keep, do my job,
Hmm.
and kids and whatever. I mean, that's fine and well and all, but simply by not doing anything, even speaking out is something more,
Right.
taking a form of action, but just complete apathy is
Mhm.
is continuing to perpetuate the reality which we already have.
Right. And, what that really brings up for me, and what we've talked about before here, is the unholy trinity,
Mm,
of, ignorance, apathy, and, cowardice,
mm-hmm.
and that's definitely that is the place and the foundational terrain where this mindset comes from, you know.
Right. Don't know,
Um,
don't care. Don't
mhm.
know, don't
And
care.
then, looking at, the principle of gender, this is something that, we talk about a lot, the sacred masculine and the sacred feminine, and that balance between the logic and the intellectual brain and the creative and the more feminine, flowing and open side of the brain.
Right.
And, these are two things that they definitely play off each other to create a polarity within the individual. So tying these, you can see how these principles all tie together. These are all, this is cosmic law stuff. These are all in effect all the time, and they are all interacting. So, understand them individually, but then also make sure you can understand to see how they're relating to each other and supporting each other. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but definitely that balance between, left and right, you can see that very much play out in the physical manifestation of, you see this polarity between people of, they're either a Democrat or a Republican, or they're, a communist or a fascist, or, whatever the fuck
Right.
it is.
And
They're,
oftentimes these
swung to one side
polarities
or the
very
other.
much correlate to the masculine and feminine ends of the spectrum.
Absolutely.
So, communism and capitalism, for example. Communism is that feminine, everybody's cared for, everybody get along and cooperate, and you're a collective, versus capitalism is very, very, almost to a fault, individualistic, and just like,
Right.
may the best man win. It's almost like when, in elementary school, where like some kids just really awesome and he takes all like the first place rhythm or ribbons, and all the other parents are mad, and they want participation rhythms ribbons for their kids, so that everybody feels like they got a little pat, good job, and everybody feels included and everything. Like, you see
Mm.
this all playing out on the political landscape about like tolerance and inclusion and all this kind of stuff, and hyper imbalanced feelings versus, what does the conservatives always say, fuck your feelings. That's such a
Mm.
toxic masculine version of it, like like
Right.
totally depressing and everything.
Yeah, and they're both unbalanced, wounded states of being.
Masculine
They're
and
coming from
feminine.
a place of being polarized into one or the other, rather than having the balance with both. Like, as I was talking
Right.
earlier, one of the things I was, you can see even in the observation of, the physical body, because, with the law of correspondence, we can, you can analyze things from the realm of spirit, the realm of mind, into the physical, but you can also kind of do it in the reverse. So when we can look at our body, we can see that the right brain controls the left side of the body, and the left brain controls the
Mhm.
right side of the body. There
Right.
has to be this cross between the two, in order for you to actually properly function, because one without the other is just going to result in an imbalance and a polarity, where you're going to be coming from a place that you're not on a strong foundation, and then the processing, and then therefore the actions you take after that are going to create situations that you don't really want to experience.
Right. And I definitely want to just briefly touch on this, taking it back to, because so much of this stuff starts in school and the way that we're taught and indoctrinated from a very early age. Our education system is so strong emphasis on the right brain modalities of reading, writing, arithmetic, and such a,
You mean left brain?
oh yeah, yeah, sorry,
Yeah.
left brain only, and such a very limited, if not non-existent, emphasis on right brain things like dancing, art, and music, for example.
Mhm.
What this does is it's putting your brain into the computer side of the brain. And what is a computer? It's programmable. You can just install the software, and then it does what it's supposed to do. And so you're indoctrinating, the state is indoctrinating people through the education system to, lo and behold, persist and you know, perpetuate that state system of control.
Ooh, this is bringing up for me is earlier, you know, we talked about how free will, it's that random component of the universe, but we can really see that kind of as very much, we can tie that in with that feminine energy, I think.
It's the feminine, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly, because that's that free flow, you know, sometimes it's that unpredictability that, you know, is
because
that
if
creativity.
you're running on programs, what it's predictable. You know what it's going to do. Yeah.
Right. So that, you know, again, we can see that's why obviously, you know, the feminine is such a, you know, energy that is very much try to, you know, be suppressed. And because the more they can suppress one, that they know that throws both of them out of balance, both within the individual, but then obviously that echoes into society as well.
Ooh, and you know, this might be a little bit fringy and a little out there, but I really think there's something to it. So I always think about this, you know, from the perspective of just very basic masculine and feminine, from a geometric, you know, approach. The masculine is linear, right? So it's the straight line. Even our bodies, like the hip waist ratio is straight up and down, where women are curved. I've always kind of felt drawn to this idea about the shape of hair, or like the texture, you know, where it's very straight and easy to style, you know, easy to control the straight hair. That's the masculine. And what do we call hair that's frizzy and crazy? It's unruly, right? It's hard to rule. And that's the feminine. It's the frizzy, unpredictable feminine component as well. And I'll even go as far as to say, you can look at how, like, dark-skinned people, and they have very frizzy hair. Well, dark-skinned people have been very systematically oppressed, and they very much embody that water energy, that feminine, emotional, musical. There's something there's a correlation there. There has to.
That's a very interesting thing to look at and consider for sure. Because there, you know, there's definitely some teachings out there that, you know, very much relate the African people with the water element, which is
right.
Feminine. So that, you know, very, very interesting point to kind of consider that I hadn't thought about before. Now, the last principle that we want to look at here, and this is obviously, you know, one, you know, that Mark Passio is, you know, what he calls the lost principle of care. And this is something, you know, that is so important, and that a lot of times when we see people who are advocating for governments, because they're coming from a place of that they just feel so lost that they just don't care, or they're too scared to care.
Right.
You know, because then there's that fear that they, you know, that might then give them responsibility, and then they might mess up and they might get ridiculed or rejected, or, you know, whatever this is. And they're afraid of that happening because, you know, they've been traumatized as a child and they're used to that happening. So then they don't want that to happen. So then they're going around trying to please everybody. You know, it very much sets up for this state of a person coming into apathy and just losing that care and losing that willpower. And, you know, so this is, you know, something that developing that care and tapping into that heart-based intelligence, which was, you know, if anyone hasn't checked it out yet, our interview with Mark Passio that we did, that, you know, called The Heart of the Matter, that was the whole you know, thing it was based on. The topic is, yeah, exactly, was heart-based intelligence, and getting into, you know, just out of the getting, you know, not shutting off the left brain or the intellectual understanding, but realizing that's just one path to it. But a really powerful path is getting into the heart-based intelligence and awakening that care within ourselves, to where not only do we care about ourselves and respect ourselves, but that we care about and respect, you know, the sovereignty and the rights of other beings. And then when we care enough to not violate those, that's when we really can start to, you know, act in alignment with cosmic law, and then create that free world that we're really seeking after.
Right. Because again, taking it back to that whole, what are you advocating? You know, it's like, say some new law passed and it's just totally arbitrary, like some kind of curfew or something, and it's like, what do you think should happen to me if I was to break that law? Most people are going to try to say, well, you'd get arrested, or no, I'm not asking what would happen to me. I'm asking what you condone, what you advocate they should do to me if I break this law. And they're basically, that question is so powerful because they're put in a really uncomfortable dilemma of either they have to acknowledge that they are psychopathic and they're supporting the initiation of violence to somebody who's literally not causing any harm to anyone, or they have to admit to themselves that maybe my own conscience comes above the government and I have no moral obligation to follow any laws that I don't see fit to. That's a really difficult place for some people to be put in, but that is the crossroads right there. If you bring them right up to that point, that's the moment of truth right there, essentially. So yeah, you have to, and their brain is going to start going crazy, like, oh, this way and that way, or some way they can squirm out of it. But that's why this is the answer right here. This already knows, and your brain is going but your heart is like, you're right, bro. You're so right.
Yeah. And, leading into this here, for me, I think another interesting thing to look at here that we can kind of delve into is kind of a last big subject on this is the animist, pagan, polytheistic mindset and how that really comes in alignment with anarchy and with cosmic law. And again, we can look at, taking it back to the mythology we talked about, Odin earlier, and how he wasn't, he was willing to sacrifice himself in order to gain the wisdom that he was seeking after. That warrior mindset of being so sovereign and empowered in yourself that you don't expect, you're not codependent on anybody else to do it. You don't need a savior. You are willing to act on your own to go after what you need, and you're not trying to save other people. You don't have a savior. You don't need a savior, and you're not trying to be anyone else's savior. So, and that's obviously something we see in the whole Abrahamic tradition, especially Christianity, is that savior projection, very fundamental theme, and that's something we'll delve into in future episodes deeper. But that's a very anti-sovereignty mindset. If you really look at it, that you have to have some being or something outside of yourself in order to save you. Whereas the animistic and the pagan mindset is very much a warrior mindset where it's coming back to your own individual choices and actions. You're not looking for a savior. You're willing to take action on whatever you need to achieve what you want. And you're also not forcing like your ways upon anyone else. There's a lot more tolerance and understanding when you look at in like a polytheistic or a animistic, shamanic belief system. You won't find them caring really what God, someone specifically works with or what tradition it is, because it's coming from the understanding there's universal truth in spiritual sciences that can be discovered. And as long as you have a path that's leading to that source, it doesn't really matter. If it's working for you, it works for you. Whereas, you take some of the, like the more Abrahamic religions, they're a lot more dogmatic as, it's very literal and it has to be taken this way, and very much not very compatible with sovereignty and anarchy when we look at that. And this is something that, again, we have a very, in-depth, project that we're going to be planning, and we're going to be looking at these dynamics much, much deeper. But just for people to kind of start to think about it and, digest it a little bit and start to question themselves, looking at that. And like I said, I know for myself, my understanding of sovereignty and boundaries grew so much deeper as I found my ancestral path and, started stepping into the animistic and, the polytheistic mindset. It definitely is a lot more conductive, in my opinion, of being able to come to these understandings.
Absolutely. And something that kind of occurred to me as well when you were talking about this, when we're looking at this dynamic of the spiritual warrior and how this has actually kind of been perverted and twisted and corrupted into this kind of modern day new age version of it. Maybe not new age, but I mean just like modern day in that
Mhm.
way, where money is the new religion, and everyone is all really identified with being a hustler, and like, if it don't make dollars, it don't make sense. How we've talked a couple of times about how money acts as a proxy for true currency, the emotional
Mhm.
care. That's why it's green, the color of the heart chakra dictates what you care about. And then this tagline popped into my head when you were just talking about get rich or die trying. That's like the modern day spiritual warrior, but toxic version of it, where really what they should care about is truth. And so get truth or die trying is the actual true spiritual warrior mantra. But nowadays it's just all about monetary gains and material wealth and things like that. It
Mhm.
just, that's kind of really interesting thing to kind of consider there. So
Mhm.
any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I mean that's definitely an interesting way to look at it for sure. Because
It's like
like
they've kind of
you know, there,
hijacked that and tried to put it into a
mhm.
disempowered format.
Right, very, very much so. Like we talked about in our episode about police, where we speak about order followers, they take this mindset of, wanting to be a
Exactly.
warrior, and then they twist it and turn it and use it for another purpose. So that's another interesting way in which that can play out. Absolutely.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I think this is kind of getting to a good place to maybe wrap this episode up here. You
Hmm.
have any other kind of last minute thoughts or?
No, I'm good with it, man. I think we pretty much covered all the main stuff for the most part. I want to take this time to remind everybody we are always um, offering consultations. Brian does Vedic astrology. We both offer 9 world rune readings, and then we can offer the personal coaching, of spirituality, career choices, just whatever you're feeling like a little bit misguided or just kind of, not solid in your direction or whatever. We offer this, voluntarily. If you find value, if you value our perspectives on life, because we are coming from a place of um, understanding natural law and the way the universe operates. So we may, we're offering to tell you what you need to hear, maybe not what you want to hear, but ultimately at the end of the day, that's what's going to really be beneficial to you, more than anything else, not more than that comforting lie or whatever. So um, uh, let's let's see here.
Uh,
We have the initiation package as a free video series that we put together for you, free of charge. All you have to do is click that link in the description and check that out. It's a really good little 30-minute segment giving you some free energy practice to really get you started and really stepping into actually taking action, because we're very action oriented here at the Wizard Factory. So this is something that's going to actually give you something to do that you can trust that it's going to be effective, like right off the bat.
mhm.
And if that, yeah, I think that's going to do it. That's going to bring this episode to a close tonight. So if you enjoyed the content, if you liked what you hear, please don't be shy. Take that 1.5 seconds to click the like button, click subscribe, get the notifications every week. So we got new episodes coming out every single week. We're covering all different kinds of topics. We've got awesome guests on the show.
Mhm.
And trust me when I say it's only going to get better from here. We have such big things planned for this project in general, the Wizard Factory. So, I mean, you guys
Mhm.
haven't seen nothing yet. I'll just say that much. So, um,
Absolutely.
thank you so much for watching. It's been a pleasure. And as always, be empowered, inspired, and encouraged.